20. I am pleased to be sitting here today with my friend and someone that I deeply respect and a great leader here in Mississippi, Mr. Tedrick Ratcliffe, the Executive Vice President of the Mississippi Forestry Association. How are you, Mr. Tedrick?
Hey, Taylor, I am great. Appreciate you having me today. You were too kind and too generous in your opening segment of remarks about me, but I certainly appreciate it.
I think you're pretty all right. I really do.
I appreciate that.
I really do. I got to tell you all, in my personal experience, I love the Mississippi Forestry Association. I've been honored to do speaking events for them in the past. It's an amazing group of people, and the reason why they are so important is that so few, I think, realize in the general population about what's happening with the tree business in Mississippi. You drive down the interstate, you drive down a highway, and you see trees, and you don't think those trees in a lot of situations are owned by private landowners, and that's their livelihood. They're feeding their family, or they're creating generational wealth. So tell us what the Mississippi Forestry Association is, and really what the MFA is, what we call it for short, is doing for people in Mississippi.
Absolutely. Thanks, Taylor. So we're a statewide nonprofit made up of members, about 3,000 members across the state that represent the entire value chain. So we're really proud of our membership, and that's really what sets us apart and makes us unique is really everything from that seedling going in the ground after a stump has been made all the way to finished product goods that are bought and sold. And so everything that touches that tree along the way is something that's likely one of our members. And so it's really important to our state. You were asking how big before we got started when we were off air. You know, our state's about 19.2 or 3 million acres in timber. So that's probably 62% covered area is timber. And so we don't think about that. I mean, oftentimes – unless you've been on an airplane lately and you flew back into your hometown, that final descent when you're looking out the window, you certainly notice, hey, I see a lot of trees, but just shy of 2/3 of our state covered in timber, the majority of which, some 85%, is, you're correct, owned by private landowners, most of which are non-industrial in nature, and look just like everyday people that are in the store with you. When you shop for groceries or you're at church or the coffee shop, the people around you are what those timberland owners look like.
Well, and I know also just to be able to ask you questions, and again, the text line 601-879-4395. But I know also, Tedrick, you're not just the guy who leads the way with this group, but you also have studied and have degrees, right, that involve knowing information about forestry and help people manage. And I want to give people the opportunity, if they have a question about their own tract of trees, to maybe ask. But isn't that correct?
Absolutely. And so I do have an educational background in timber and forestry and forest management. And so we certainly can try to take a few of those and see what we can come up with.
Yeah, most of the things you learned in college you would not disclose, but you would disclose what you learned about trees.
No, so certainly I'm blessed that my forestry expertise has started long ago and is something that I knew I wanted to be a forester from a very young age.
Yeah.
And truthfully knew that I wanted to help lead this organization and help guide it. And so it's something that I spent a lot of time as a young child in a family that was in the forestry business. My dad's a forester in Mississippi as well, and so had a lot of opportunity to see things firsthand early on. So,
well, good. Well, there are a couple things we really want to hit on that I think is kind of let's go with the hotter topics first. There's some best way I could describe it is some weird stuff happening with the economic environment as far as trees go in COVID. And you know, I know there are probably a lot of landowners out there that are having a bit faint of heart feeling about what's going on with, you know, their ability to sell their product or whatever. And we want to encourage people for a lot of reasons, and we mentioned this in previous conversation, about managing their trees, about being a landowner and owning trees, you know, having it as an opportunity, as a generational element for their family. But in this particular environment, which we hope is short-lived with the coronavirus, tell us what's happening. And I want to start it by saying people are building homes and stuff like crazy, and they're paying more for the products to do the build-out than ever, okay? And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, well, then the person that's selling the wood, you know, has got to be making bank because the lumber is expensive. But somehow there's a disconnection there. Share that with us.
Absolutely. And so we'll discuss that, Taylor, but I'll back up a little further from that and just point out that our members make a lot of products. And so you specifically ask about lumber and probably panel products, building materials, home building materials. But they also make paper and pellets and other things that are used in everyday economies, not just here, but all around the world. And so depending on which niche or sub-niche of those people make, I mean, COVID's been challenging. I think for the first few weeks as we think about in Mississippi, that mid-March time frame, to where we really became on high alert about what COVID means. And so everybody was really reeling at that time, primarily to figure out how do we continue to provide an opportunity for our manufacturing facilities to continue to work and keep people safe. And so priority number one for our industry has been no different than any other day. How do we bring some 70,000 people to work in our state every day and keep everybody safe and send everybody home safe? And so in an effort to do that, I mean, certainly that changed how we worked. It changed when we worked there for several weeks. And so the result of that kind of brought up the impetus to your question is when you look around the country, we saw many lumber producers either scale back or in some cases close their doors for a period of time. Some of those closures have still not reopened. And the result of that created a lumber shortage. And you said, yes, people are still building. They are. And I mean, I think even in the last hour where you came in as a guest, y'all talked a little bit. You talked to Rebecca about, she said she accidentally bought a house. Yeah. And so I think
happens to the best of us.
I mean, it happens to a lot of folks. But the reality was we had a few weeks where everybody really was in a lockdown type situation. And maybe we thought as a country that housing starts, housing sales would be drastically slowed. We saw that temporarily. But much more recent reports have said that those predictions that we had, we under-predicted that. Yeah. And so you're right. People have continued to build. In some cases, that's been that maybe people wanted to move to a different home and they didn't want to go and tour homes that other people were living in. Maybe they were being COVID cautious and not taking those home tours, and so they made the decision to go ahead and build a dream home, a forever home, but build something on their own. And so it's put more people into that building category. But the other phenomenon that nobody saw coming is the trailer loads of lumber and wood products that people purchase to do home renovations and building projects around their house. And I mean, you and I've talked before that how many projects you worked on at your deer camp and at your house, that a lot of people did that, and it was things where maybe they were home and had a little extra time.
I'm still doing it right now.
You're still doing it?
Whether I like it or not.
Well, look, it's something that was a phenomenon we didn't see coming, and we thought, here we are.
Right. You know? Well, when we come back, we're going to hear more from Tedrick Ratcliffe about what's going on. We're going to answer your questions on the text line. I've got great questions right here. 601-879-4395. This is Taylor Sledge on SuperTalk Mississippi with Tedrick. So I want to get back to what we were talking about. I'm sitting here with Tedrick Ratcliffe, who is the Executive Vice President of the Mississippi Forestry Association, and we were talking about what's going on in the world today with the COVID economy as it pertains to the tree and wood business. And Tedrick was just sharing with me the weird disconnect that's occurred. And let me kind of trace it back. So you have the prices of the products, which is, as you know, most people would conventionally call it lumber, but then there's also wood pellets, paper, fiberboard, all different kinds of things. And you have the prices of those products. And then you go backwards from there and you have the people that actually make or produce those products, which at some point is a mill. But then those mills are running at a lower capacity. So you would think that, okay, well, there's an increase in demand and a decrease in supply, golden rule of capitalism. Somebody's making a lot of money somewhere. And you would think that would be running back to the landowner, the guy who actually owns the tree growing in the ground. But what you were saying is, that's not exactly happening.
Yeah, there's a slight disconnect there for you. And so, I mean, as we left off in the last segment talking about the phenomenon that occurred of building construction at homes and remodels and people working on decks and fences and home improvement process, you know, people saw those those shortages. They saw those price changes at their local hardware store, building supply store, but may or may not, have understood how that connected to the forest itself. And so there's separate supply and demand curves. I mean, Taylor, you're an economist of sorts, and certainly spend a lot of time in the finance world. And so what's interesting about our state, and in the majority of our state, we're growing 2.5 to 3 times the amount of timber that we harvest on an annual basis. And so in your everyday terms, that's much could be compared to a compound interest scenario. And so while, yes, nationwide, some manufacturers have run below peak, which created a lumber shortage. I mean, and you asked specifically about lumber. Lumber prices are, generally speaking, driven by 2 things, supply and housing starts. And so we discussed both of those at this point.
Right.
But then when it gets back to the supply of the raw material, even with an increased short-term demand, we still have a supply that exceeds that. And so, I mean, from that supply and demand price curve, that doesn't move because the supply so greatly outweighs. And so I know we've had a few people text in and ask about that they're harvesting their timber and specifics about those harvest operations or their prices. And so I would just answer them, and every one of those specific things is different. But what I can tell you is that they're hitting at the root of something that's...
Pun intended there, hitting at the root?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, great. Write that down, everybody.
No, it's something that's really critical for us to think about, and that's forest management and how important forest management is to our economy, to our recreation as a state, and the things that we know and love. Our state forester in Mississippi talks about healthy markets create healthy forests, and healthy forests create healthy people. And so one of the things that we know from not just around the South but around the country as a whole is where you see manufacturing facilities that purchase wood, those landowners in a reasonable radius to that are much more likely to be highly engaged in management activities.
Right.
And those management activities, while yes, in most cases are done for a profit, they have a lot of other value too. They have value to society that truthfully they're not charging the public for. Things like clean water, clean air, wildlife habitat. I know you're a hunter.
A big time.
And so we're on the JT show. I think JT would certainly appreciate us talking about hunting and fishing today.
He would.
And so landowners have an opportunity through management to do more than just grow a financial product, but to do other things as well.
Well, let's go to a couple questions from the text line about the management, because it's really interesting, because what you're saying is you're not only managing a crop for your own profit, but you're doing great things for the land that you own and the community that you live in, and it's just a good thing to do. We have a question here. It says, we have 65 acres of trees and want to do more, but we're not sure what we want to do. And I think he's talking about in the way of management. He's wondering, do I thin it? Do I cut it? What do I do? And then he wants to know, how do I get info on this? And then we had another question where a man was talking about how he has 10 acres and he's just worried to death about how to deal with the poison ivy because it's growing up, it's parasitically growing up on his trees. So we have some management questions here. Lead us to, if you're having this question, even if you have a small tract, even if you have 5 acres and you just want your trees to be pretty, you want things to go well, where should they go for information, and how could MFA help them?
So absolutely, Taylor, we always welcome people and point them to our website at msforestry.net.
Okay.
If they find us there, they're always welcome to give our office a call. And likely what's going to occur is, because every property is different, every tree is different, everybody's personal situation is different, we're going to try to direct them to a registered forester that's a consulting forester in their area. We're certainly happy to help people find those. And what that consulting forester can do is meet with the landowner, help them evaluate their current situation, help them develop a plan for how they want to move forward. If that's a management plan, if that's using herbicides, if it's using prescribed fire, maybe they need to have a harvest operation. But that local consulting forester can help them walk through those process. They can act as their agent to do those. And so oftentimes I find that professionals that own 40, 50, 80 acres, sometimes more, feel like that's something that they can do on their own. But then when I ask more questions, they don't manage their stock portfolio themselves. They don't manage or take care of their accounting and taxes themselves. They hire a professional. In the same way, for many Mississippians, they have such wealth tied up in their timberland, maybe sometimes that they haven't thought about yet,
Yeah, a lot of people just think of it as land.
That's right.
They don't understand that they got bonds they can clip the coupon off.
That's right. Because of the value of the asset, I really encourage them to find a professional that does that every day, that understands the individuals that have asked us about prices in their markets. And frankly, those micro markets are something that you and I may not know sitting here in the SuperTalk studio, but a local forester that works in those spaces, helps landowners every day, can do that. And so there's a myriad of resources of professionals, whether it's that consulting forester. In many cases, we're going to help them also find individuals that are logging professionals that have been trained to a higher standard. And so we're gonna help them find the resources that they need. So again, I would direct those individuals who had specific questions and needed help of what do I do next to our website at msforestry.net.
Well, and as the Executive Vice President, Tedrick, of Mississippi Forestry Association, you are advocating for the landowner and for the health of those trees. And, I'm a member of the Mississippi Forestry Association. I personally am a landowner, and I've got trees on my land. And I've got family that's got the same situation. And I can vouch for two things that are really interesting. Number one, being a member of the Mississippi Forestry Association does not have to be expensive. I mean, it can be very, very cheap. And I can't remember the bottom line price, but it's based on the amount of acreage you have. So even if you have 25 acres and you're thinking, you know what, I just want to be able to pick up the phone and get some help on this, you got somebody that's going to come out and advocate for you, help you figure out how to do it just right, and maybe even create a better legacy one day or opportunity to make a few bucks when you cut some trees, all the way up to the people that have tens of thousands of acres. Y'all are right there with them. So that's been the relationship that I've had. And I've even had a couple of experiences where I had family members that had serious questions about this asset, or friends that serious questions about this asset. I direct them to you. And I mean, not only are you going to be able to talk to them about the trees, but y'all are also like, here's some great resources. Here's some people you could talk to. Here's somebody we've vetted. We know them. There's a lot of things there. So, Tedrick, we really appreciate having you on.
Absolutely. Taylor, it was an honor to come on and be with you today, and certainly we'll do it again. But absolutely, if people have more questions, they can find us at msforestry.net, find us on LinkedIn or Twitter. We'll certainly come alongside of them, help them walk through their journey of being a timberland owner, and find them the resources that they need.
Thank you so much. Check out the Mississippi Forestry Association. Thank you so much, Tedrick Ratcliffe, for joining us today, the Executive Vice President. This is Taylor Sledge on the JT Show. More fun to come. Stick